been diagnosed with mesothelioma, and you're trying to understand how it could have happened or where you'd have come in contact with the asbestos that caused the disease. You never worked in a shipyard, you never installed insulation, and you never served on a Navy ship. For many people, the answer is that decades ago, someone close to them did, and they unknowingly brought asbestos home on their clothes, their hair, or on their skin. It's called secondary or take-home asbestos exposure, and it has led to mesothelioma and asbestos-related lung cancer in thousands of people who never set foot in a workplace where the deadly material was used. I'm Terri Oppenheimer. I've been writing about mesothelioma and asbestos for the website mesothelioma.net for over a decade. Stories of deadly illnesses caused by secondary exposure are among the most heartbreaking I cover. Let's start by understanding exactly how secondary exposure works. When asbestos and asbestos-containing materials are damaged, whether through being manipulated, installed, removed, or simply through age or wear and tear, it can break down into tiny microscopic fibers. You can't see them, taste them, or feel them. When someone works with asbestos-containing materials, those fibers rise into the air and then land on them. It gets in their hair, on their clothes, or it settles on their skin. If they're wearing special work clothes, it gets on them. It gets in their boots. Now think about what happens when that worker leaves work. Those fibers come with them and they transfer. A wife hugs her husband when he comes home, fibers transfer. Children hug their father. The worker sits in a chair, lies on a couch, sleeps in a bed. Fibers shed and settle into furniture and carpets, exposing everyone else in the household. As easy as it is to picture that scenario, the most common way that secondary exposure takes place is in the laundry room. After their day at work, husbands and fathers and sons came home and took off their dust-covered work clothes to be washed, most often by wives, daughters, and mothers. In the process, those women have sorted, shaken out, and laundered the dirty clothes. They put them in the washing machine. They sweep up the dust that's fallen in the floor. This innocent household chore has them directly handling fabric that's contaminated with asbestos and breathing in deadly airborne particles. This unfortunate scenario happened in households across America from the 1940s through the 1980s and beyond. Over months, years, and decades, these family members inhaled asbestos fibers, not as heavily as the workers themselves, but still several times a week in the small space of the laundry room. In far too many cases, it's been enough to cause mesothelioma 30, 40, or 50 years later. I want to take a little break here and remind everyone, if you're finding this information helpful, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps us get our videos seen by as many people as possible. And if there's a topic you'd like to see covered or a question you'd like answered in a future video, let me know in the comments section below. Also, make sure to watch until the end of this video. I'll tell you exactly how to access help and resources if you or someone you love has been diagnosed with mesothelioma. Now, the industries that have been most frequently linked to the secondary exposure cases, they're the shipyards and ship repair locations, construction trades, especially any job involving insulation, steel mills, industrial plants, auto repair shops where workers handled asbestos-contaminated brake pads and clutches. What makes secondary exposure particularly cruel is that the victims were being exposed while they were one step removed from the dangerous material. The worker who carried the asbestos into the home, they had no idea they were at risk themselves, let alone that they were putting family members at risk. They had no warnings from their employers or the manufacturers. They may have been sickened themselves. Now they have to live with the knowledge that they unknowingly brought the toxin into their home. The price of the corporate negligence is multiplied. We have seen devastating situations where a shipyard worker develops mesothelioma and dies from it. And then, years later, their spouse develops mesothelioma from secondary exposure. Families that have already lost one person to this cruel disease, now they have to face losing another. Because more and more of these tragedies have happened and they've been realizing what happened, secondary asbestos exposure is now recognized as a basis for legal action and compensation. Courts have repeatedly agreed that companies that manufactured asbestos products and employers who fail to protect workers' family members, they're liable not only for the workers' illnesses, but also for illnesses of family members exposed secondarily. If you developed mesothelioma from secondary exposure, you can access asbestos trust funds and file claims seeking compensation for medical expenses, lost income, pain and suffering, and loss of quality of life. Now, it's important to know that proving a secondary exposure case can be more challenging than proving direct occupational exposure. You didn't work at the job site, so you don't have employment records, any safety training documents, or coworkers who can testify about conditions on site. You're going to need to prove that your exposure came from your family member's work history, and you'll need to establish that their work involved asbestos in ways that would have contaminated their clothing. That's why you need to work with attorneys who specifically have experience with secondary exposure cases. They're going to need to investigate and document your family member's employment, identify what asbestos products were used in their workplace, establish the timeline of when that family member worked there and when you lived with them, and they're going to need to connect your diagnosis to that specific exposure pathway. They're going to need to establish that you were living with or regularly in contact with the worker during the period when they were exposed to asbestos. So, for example, if your father worked as an insulator in the 1960s and you were living at home during that time, that would establish an exposure window. Regularity of exposure is another thing that needs to be established. Living in the same household where work clothes were routinely handled represents sustained exposure that can cause disease. Most victims of secondary exposure are women who were exposed in the course of caring for their families. They were wives, daughters, mothers, doing laundry and keeping house. There's something profoundly unfair about being harmed while taking care of the people you love. If you developed mesothelioma from secondary exposure through a family member's work, you are not alone, you did nothing wrong, and you have legal rights. Your exposure was the result of companies choosing profits over safety and failing to warn workers that they were at risk or that they were bringing asbestos home to their families. If you've been diagnosed with mesothelioma and you think secondary exposure might be the cause, start documenting every single thing you remember. Write down who in your family worked with asbestos, what companies they worked for and when, what their specific job duties were if you know them, and whether they came home in dirty work clothes. Also, whether you personally handled those clothes and what your relationship was to that person. This is the information that will be critical for your attorney to build your case. Even if some details are fuzzy, write down what you remember. One memory often triggers another, and the more detail you can provide, the easier it becomes to investigate and prove your exposure. You deserve compensation and justice, but secondary exposure cases require attorneys with specific experience in this type of claim. Visit mesothelioma.net and fill out our form for a free information packet, or call 1-800-692-8608 to speak directly to one of our patient advocates. You can also use the live chat feature on our website. As for me, remember to post your questions below, and I'll see you next time.